You gotta feel sorry for the weebs. These are the enthusiasts of any sorts of Japanese works outside of Japan, and they have to surrender to the rules of society controlled by the normies. So if the normies say that they're not gonna get their latest waifu simulator, then they're not gonna get their latest waifu simulator. But one thing I can say for sure is that despite the constant oppression from the normies, weebs always find a way to rise up. And in this video, I'm going to show you how the weebs are oppressed by the normies and why weebs should rise up. Before we get started, as always, thank you so much for supporting this channel. You can do so by checking the links down below. Here's a funny thing about Japanese entertainment that you really need to know. People who hung out a lot on social media seems to think that because their mutuals and friends talk about Japanese entertainment a lot, because there are more English-speaking people that talk about them, that automatically means that Japanese entertainment is well received by the people outside of Japan, which is only about as technically true as me being an e-celeb because I have more than 60k subs. No, I'm not. I've said this in the past about how social media has clouded people's perception of reality thanks to the many loud mouths that dominate the flow of information and the silent majority that has many other better things to do than flooding the social media with every activity they do. But do you know what else that clouds your perception of reality? Only following or hanging out with people or close friends that shares your hobby and tastes, which is good for your mental health and general happiness, but not so good for knowing what other people are like outside of your clique. This video is going to talk about those people who, for the sake of simplicity rather than general mockery, I'm going to refer to as normies. You don't have to imagine the existence of someone who doesn't share your hobby, doesn't share your passion, doesn't share your general interests, and not knowing what this waifu thing that the kids are talking about. And by kids, I mean young adults and not actual kids. If your actual kids are talking about waifu stuff, you should seriously get themselves checked. Anyway, these normies exist, and considering that you are outside of Japan, the number of those people are actually enormous compared to you, your friends, assuming you have some, and your family, assuming you're getting along with them. Now, considering that these normies don't understand your hobby, don't share your hobby, and don't know the culture of your hobby, the best viewpoint that they're going to offer are the most surface level observations. And unfortunately, a hard truth that the weebs need to face is that the surface level of being a weeb is an immature, creepy, repulsive, and generally unpleasant adult that likes Japanese cartoons featuring high school girls. Obviously, that is not my viewpoint. I am a weeb myself, and while I am quite immature, I at least do my best to not be creepy, repulsive, or unpleasant. But that is how a lot of normies view us, and a lot of those are based on what we generally like. Oh, you like cartoons that feature high school characters? Should we be calling the police? The best example for me to illustrate this point is an interaction that I had between me and a family member. Now, for those of you who are familiar with my stream, I have a doll of Kyubey from Madoka Magica, an anime notorious for having a really dark story that made people to lose their heads. The creature in question is not exactly a creature that invites a particularly welcoming aura, which is one of the reasons why I love it. This doll is a nice little prop for the stream to scare the living crap out of people, and a nice souvenir in general, at least when it's dead. And then comes my boomer nanny aunt, who knows about anime culture about as much as I know how to speak Klingon, who assumes that I am childish because I have a doll, which isn't an entirely inaccurate observation. This is at the point where a socially inept and insecure weeb would go on a fanboy or a fangirl tirade explaining in lengths about the character's significance towards the anime and how this character represents a dark force that brings torment towards all of humanity. But while I am socially inept, at least I am not insecure about my hobby. I at least admit the fact that yes, some people might look at this and thought that it's childish to own a doll, and I own that fact rather than straight up denying it. Now that's just one doll. Imagine if you have an entire collection of action figures and then your clueless infant cousin come into your room and wreck everything. Point is, your hobby has been frowned upon, is frowned upon, and will continue to be frowned upon by the people who don't understand them. Being a weeb is pretty much one of the worst things in geek culture that the society frowns upon, only second to being a furry. We're not living in a society where normies look at weebs and think that they're normal, well-adjusted people. We live in a society where normies look at weebs and think that they're a bunch of man-children. Even if you hire the best PR guy to represent all the weebs around the world, you simply cannot convince the normies into thinking that 20 to 30 plus year old adults watching Japanese animated cartoons starring high school characters talking about the power of friendship are somehow a bunch of mature individuals. Now let me clarify that that's not my opinion. I frankly do not give a damn in what kind of hobby that you're into as long as you're not harming harming anybody, and as long as you're capable of sustaining your own life, and as long as you're a well-functioning, productive member of society. My goal here is not to tell you to appease to the normies' standards of maturity, or anyone's standards of maturity, because all of them are nothing but hypocritical projections of their own immaturity. The point that I'm trying to make is to explain to you the state that we are currently living in right now. That state is not a very good one. That state is not the one where you can legitimately convince the normies that your hobby is something that they can accept. But that's just the least of your worries. Normies judging us for our hobbies is nothing new. It doesn't matter if the normies think that our hobbies make us immature or childish, except it does. And let me explain to you why. What you need to understand is that we're not living in a weeb society. We're living in a normie society. Society is built with a significant portion of these normies in it. A lot of these normies control a good portion of our lives, some of which includes the distribution of Japanese entertainment. And if they decide that these Japanese entertainment that we consume are offensive or problematic, they are going to change them. They are going to make sure that those Japanese works conform into the Western standards. And if they can't, they're going to ban them or remove them. So recently, a couple of light novels are straight up removed by Amazon, as confirmed by the respective publishers of those light novels in some recent tweets. Why? No specific reason are given, but we can at least speculate that it's the normies who are in charge of this. I mean, one of the light novel is freaking No Game No Life. Just from the cover alone, we're definitely gonna have the normies be like, what kind of sick perverted adult read this sort of stuff? This should be banned at all costs. There are more anime related bans on platforms like Patreon and even the infamous Hub. I'll talk about that in detail in an upcoming stream because YouTube doesn't like it when I talk about non-family friendly stuff. But even just through the Amazon removals alone, you can see that the normies are particularly biased towards any depictions of non-adult characters or characters that don't appear to be adults. They're especially biased towards light novels that show drawings of these characters in any sorts of scenarios where they are using limited or even no clothing whatsoever, such as in baths. That sort of thing happens in pretty much almost every anime at this point. A lot of animes feature high schoolers, and high schoolers aren't really adults the last time I checked. Depending on the anime genre, some of these high schoolers are faced with scenarios that are intended to service the fans. Not exactly something that would convince the normies that these are the sorts of things that are acceptable to be distributed around their store. Yes, you can say that these normies' opinions are worthless, but these are the people that control the distribution of your entertainment. It's very difficult to convince the normies that these animes that we adults watch about characters in high school that has tons of arousing and compromising scenes should be sold and distributed to the public. They're probably gonna talk about how it's creepy, it's problematic, and if people consume them, they're gonna turn creepy as a result, etc. This sort of thing is incredibly common, and it happens to pretty much everything Japanese related, really. Light novels got hit, mangas got hit, animes got hit, video games got hit, a lot of things got hit. It happened a lot in the past, it happened just recently, and it will continue to happen in the future, so long as these normies have control over the platforms where these entertainment are distributed. This is precisely why a lot of weebs generally prefer fan translations or piracy. At least the distribution of those two things are coming from people who are genuinely passionate towards the hobby, and not, say, the Amazon normies. And this brings me to a really wild plan. What if we, as weebs, infiltrate these big corporations like Amazon as normies? We go undercover and pretend to be normies. We get ourselves promoted into the crucial aspects of those corporations. And then, when the excrement hits the circulation, if you know what I mean, we at least have control over it, and we have weebs to be able to handle the situation. And it's not just gonna be Amazon, it's also gonna be companies that always censor these stuff. Isn't that basically what the ideologues do? Except this time we're doing it to them, and let them to have a taste of their own medicine. Sounds like a good plan, right? Well, it is on paper, but there's a bit of a problem. That plan is under the assumption that we have a good enough number of weebs to control these crucial aspects of those corporations. That plan is under the assumption that we have a good enough number of weebs who are qualified to work normally as normies in the real world. That plan is under the assumption that weebs in general have a good social skill and are suave and charismatic enough to fool your nearest normie into thinking that you don't have a particular interest towards high school anime girls. Basically what I'm saying is that if we want a weeb takeover to prevent future censorships from happening, we need weebs to be able to do normie stuff. And no offense to all the weebs out there, but considering their general disgust towards doing any sorts of normie stuff, this is not a plan that's going to happen anytime soon. What I mean by normie stuff are things that boring people do, like managing corporations, making laws and regulations, doing everything that you can to make sure that a company can stay afloat and operate their business. Are you prepared to handle that amount of responsibility to save these hobbies that you have? Are you prepared to integrate within the general society and conform to their norms so that your hobbies can be saved, or at least temporarily? Is the word responsibility still within your dictionary? Now forgive me if that sounds incredibly condescending. If you are a weeb or someone who likes Japanese entertainment and you are a respectable, productive member of society, that's great. I'm just saying that our numbers are too small to be able to do a takeover that significant. Our numbers are too small to be able to make a significant change within the normie culture. The weeb's eternal curse is none other than society itself. While society scorns us and our hobbies, there's no denying that we absolutely need them for the world that we live in general to work. Society doesn't understand us. Society rejects our hobby because it's weird and unusual. Society rejects our media and treat them as if they're harmful and a public menace. Society censors our media to make sure that it fits within the consumption of other normies rather than ourselves. So the obvious solution to this problem is essentially weebs rise up so that they can take over our incredibly flawed society. But even that one is a curse in and of itself because we're too small and not a lot of us are capable of doing what the normies are capable of doing. But thankfully, we don't have to surrender ourselves to the clutches of society. At the end of the day, Amazon isn't the only distribution service out there. It is the most popular, yes, but it's not the definitive one-stop resource for all of your anime stuff. Alternatives exist, and some of these alternatives are made by weebs themselves. These can come from fan translations, which are abundant to even the most complicated weeb stuff out there, or even distribution companies that have people that are already familiar with this stuff. The only way for the normies to oppress us and our media is if we keep relying on their system. But thankfully, we don't have to because alternatives exist. I have already talked many times about how Western standards can affect foreign works in some ways, but that only tends to happen if you're going for a more mainstream, more international appeal, which is why it always happens to shonen animes or more mainstream video games. As I said many times in the past, the Japanese market are too busy trying to compete within their own and trying to appeal to their own customers to actually care about distributing their works internationally. The fact that they can at all is quite a privilege. I've already had a video talking about that and other ways for you to support Japanese creators, and also talking about anime piracy in general. You can watch that, link down below. I have numbers, statistics, and all of that. In conclusion, the weeb's biggest problem and their biggest curse is society, and how the normies within those societies don't accept them and their hobbies. That has led to the numerous censorships that happen, and unfortunately, if weebs want to prevent those censorship, they have to rise up and take over society. And the sad reality is, most weebs would rather watch the latest slice of life rom-com than actually taking over society, being responsible, and all of that crap. Thankfully, weebs don't always have to conform into the society's rules. This is a community consisting of the most passionate people on planet Earth. They're able to survive on their own and distribute Japanese media among themselves through the means of fan translations or publishing in websites that are not as censorious. Alternatives will always exist because weebs make those alternatives, and they might even be better than the original way. As long as weebs are able to maintain that passion, as long as weebs can sustain themselves out of the clutches of the normies, as long as weebs are able to continuously make alternative roads for people to enjoy these Japanese entertainment, I think anime, manga, and any other Japanese media are going to do just fine. There will always be some people that reject us and butcher our most beloved entertainment, but we will always find a way to circumvent through it and still enjoy it for what they originally are. You can even say that this is one of the many forms of the power of friendship. Life is magical that way.